The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "Hear another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. Then he leased it to tenants and went on a journey. When vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to obtain his produce. But the tenants seized the servants, and one they beat, another they killed, and a third they stoned. Again, he sent other servants, more numerous than the first ones, but they treated them the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, thinking, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and acquire his inheritance.' They seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to those tenants when he comes?" They answered him, "He will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the proper times." Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the scriptures, 'The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord this has been done, and it is wonderful in our eyes.' Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that will produce its fruit." The Gospel of the Lord. Okay, there are two parables in our readings today, and they are very similar. In our first reading from Isaiah and in our gospel reading from Matthew, we have a landowner who lavishes extraordinary care on his vineyard. He digs it, clears it of stones, plants it with choice vines, builds a watchtower, hews out a wine vat in it. He dreams of beautiful, bountiful grapes ripening in the sun and eventually becoming choice wine. In both stories, the landowner represents God's dream for God's people. And in the Isaiah parable, the people are represented by the vineyard itself that produces lousy, wild grapes. And in the gospel parable, the people are represented by the tenants who do horrible things in hopes of obtaining the vineyard for themselves. In both stories, the people fail miserably. God lavished love upon them, but where did God's people place their trust? Not in God, in things other than God: magic arts, foreign powers, earthly wealth, military might, and other idols. And it rendered them isolated and alone. Sad stories, huh? Both parables, though, also show how God is bound. God is inextricably bound to the people, to us. And both show how sometimes those ties can go bad. But the bonds that hold us together and hold us to God do not always go bad, of course. The vast majority of our relationships remain true, whole, strong, and some become cornerstone bonds that sustain us for a lifetime. On the day that you were baptized, just as Aida, Ansel, and Leo will be baptized on Sunday, there were people who had big dreams for you. They dreamt that as you grow with character and integrity, you would also grow into a deep, abiding relationship with God. And that faith would become integral to your life and guide you all along the way. Your parents, your godparents, your grandparents, and all those in the community of faith shared this dream with you. They became a cornerstone for you to launch and live a life of faith. So on Sunday, I'll say, listen up, Aida, Ansel, Leo. This is just what your parents and godparents are dreaming as you are baptized today. They simply want to fulfill God's ideas for you. And they recognize they can't do it alone. They need the promise of the whole community to support them and hold them accountable to raise you in God's own image and likeness. I know that most of you can relate to what I'm talking about because you yourself have had this dream for a child, your child, a niece, a nephew, a godchild, your grandchild. I've told you before, I've told the story before, but I want to tell it again about the birth of our first son, Niccolo. Reen, my wife, had a very difficult pregnancy, and Niccolo was born 11 weeks premature and weighed just over 2 pounds. Very tiny. So small that we have a photo of him wearing my wedding ring on his elbow. He spent 10 of those 11 weeks in an isolate incubator in the hospital, while Reen and I spent most of each day in the hospital with him. We were young. This was our first child. We were often confused. And day to day, we did not know what to expect. But we were not alone, far from it. All the while, we were surrounded with love, support, and real help from our community of faith, St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Spokane, Washington. Parishioners mobilized an effort of support that included meals each day, regular hospital visits, baby gifts, money, you name it, whatever we needed. On the day that Niccolo was baptized, well, he was truly named and claimed by the entire community of St. Pat's. Okay, so a dozen or so years go by. We had moved from Spokane to Portland. So when Niccolo was 12 or 13, we took a trip back to Spokane to visit friends and of course went to Mass at St. Pat's. And I'll never forget that Sunday morning and all those people, especially the women who Niccolo did not know at all, demanded to hug him, kiss him, hold him, and tell him of their love. He hated it, of course. What? He's 12. But his mom and I, we were touched beyond anything you can imagine. A cornerstone experience for Reen and me. You know, by design, each generation takes what is most precious and hands it off to the next generation. And for the most part, does it as carefully and lovingly as possible, like the landowner with his vineyard. And often, of course, the younger generation doesn't get it. They don't get what's going on. They don't recognize what is so precious and interprets the gestures of love and care as, well, meddling and attempts to control. But so it has been, down through the ages, generation after generation. So I'll say to Aida, Ansel, and Leo, you will not remember this day of your baptism, so it's really important for your parents, godparents, grandparents, family members, and the whole Christian community to tell you about it, to remember it for you, and make it come alive for you as you grow and mature. How do we pass faith to the next generations? It's the bonds, it's the relationships, and it's the cornerstone experiences that really count. So Aida, Ansel, Leo, here's the lesson we, the big people in your lives, are learning today. Like the people of Judah to whom Isaiah was speaking, and like the vineyard tenants in the gospel parable, there will be times when we fail in our covenant with God, with you, with each other. There will be times when we turn our backs on one another and on God. But even when we fall short, the good news is that God, like the women of St. Pat's welcoming Niccolo into their arms, will always and forever remain true to the covenant of unconditional love and forgiveness.